I'm a future criminal barrister starting pupillage in October 2025, and in this video I'm going to give you my top tips for your pupillage interviews. The first thing to say is even getting a first round interview is a massive achievement, so you've done well to get that far. Why should you listen to me? Well, I converted all of my 6 first round interviews into second round interviews and then 6 second round interviews into 3 offers. So something that I did last year works, and hopefully some of the tips I can give can help you this year. The first thing I'm going to say is that you need to prepare for the known. What I mean by this is that there is questions that come up again and again in pupillage interviews, and you need to be ready to answer these. Why do you want to become a barrister? Why our area of law? Why our chambers? Why a regional pupillage and not a London-based pupillage? These are questions you're going to be asked. When tackling these known questions, I would start by making a list of bullet points, a bit like this, and then work from those bullet points. Practice in front of a camera and get the points out you want just using the bullet points. Don't refer to a script. Don't get me wrong, scripts are useful and have their place, but in interview you want to be flexible and able to adapt to the questions. So if you just go off of your bullet points, you'll sound more natural, the flow will be there, and you'll be able to recall it much easier in interview. Once you've made some recordings of yourself, listen back to them 3 or 4 times, even if it's painful. When you're watching them back, really nitpick, look for your filler words, the and or ums, and try to minimize those or cut them out. Also, try and look for other things that you might be doing wrong. For example, coming across as not being genuine or speaking too quickly. Identify those things that are wrong and really work on them. It'll be different for each person. If you had an employability department at your university or currently do, go and see them, because they might have a bank of the previous questions, the same set used in interview, which is obviously going to be a massive help in preparing and tailoring your answers to that specific interview. My second tip is your current awareness needs to be absolutely on point. I'd say around 90% of my interviews asked me a legal opinion on something that was in the news. For this reason, it's really important to have your head out the sand and be aware of what's going on and have opinions on it that you can give to the panel. And for this, I have 2 tips. First of all, check the news frequently, and when you do check it and see an article that could be related to law, write down 3 points for whatever it is and 3 points against, or just write down a summary of it so that it sticks into your brain below. And this is a fantastic resource which allows you to stay up to date with legal developments as opposed to just more general in the news like BBC News, etc. And it is highly recommended by myself. Definitely don't overlook the importance of this Inner Temple newsletter, because it gives you updates on specific areas of law. So if you're going for a family pupillage, you'll want to be up to date with the latest family law, commercial law, etc. My third tip is to make sure you're prepared for debate questions. These came up frequently in my second round interviews, and they were my least favourite question. Sometimes you have preparation time and sometimes it's completely blind. Whether you have time to prepare or not, the structure you follow should be the same. As you're interviewing to become a barrister, you need to answer it in a submissions-based manner. For example, I'm going to make 3 arguments why people caught in possession of a knife in public should be subject to immediate custody, no exceptions. My first point is this, my second point is this, and my third point is this. Turning now to my first point, and then you do the same for the second and the third, and then you conclude with your strongest points in a succinct manner right at the end so that the panel remember your strongest arguments. I think for the debate question, structure and performance are really key. The content is of course relevant, but if you can't come up with fantastic mind-blowing points, don't worry, focus on your performance and delivery of the points you do have. And when you're preparing your side of the argument for or against, remember that chambers will often then ask you to argue the other side. So think about both points of view, which you should be doing anyway to anticipate counter arguments. As with the generic question prep, have a go at these types of questions. They're easy to come up with. Pick a controversial or hot topic and try having a go at coming up with arguments in a few minutes for each side. Alternatively, get a close friend or family member to come up with them and test you on them. Practice makes perfect. If the set you're interviewing at gives you a little bit of prep time before the debate question, make sure you jot down some bullet points so you don't forget your key points when you're delivering the argument, but I wouldn't try and write any sort of script, just get those bullet points down and go from there. If your set is cruel enough not to give you any prep time, I would try and use some sneaky strategies to gain a bit more thinking time. For example, if they've given you a pen and paper, ask for a bit of time to write down the question so you can fully understand it. Take a long sip of water before you answer. Ask for the question to be repeated so you have time to think. These are all perfectly permissible things to do, and most definitely think before you speak. My fourth tip is that delivery and presentation are as, if not more important than what you actually say in interview. I certainly had a few interviews where I really regretted what I said or thought I said the wrong thing, but I still ended up getting through to a second round interview. And I think a large part of that was my performance and delivery and the way I conducted myself in the interview. In this regard, I've got a few tips to help people who might be nervous, especially going into their first round interview. The first thing to remember is that you're not nervous, you're excited. It sounds ridiculous, but the nerve pathways in our brains for nerves and excitement are very, very similar, and our brain can play tricks with us. If you tell yourself that you're excited to show your potential to this panel and you're not nervous that you might trip up, it can change a massive psychological shift which boosts your performance. Secondly, before you go to interview, do some breathing exercises and warm up. Once again, it sounds ridiculous, but you're going to be nervous, your vocal cords are going to be strained, so just try and lump some low pitch noises and some high pitch noises. Make sure you're well hydrated and ready to go. Then once you've done that, take some deep breaths in and some deep breaths out. Thirdly, and this is my personal favourite tip, your first sentence really sets the tone for the rest of the interview, so project it. As a more naturally introverted person, I could often struggle with settling down into a new interview. But if I go in and really boom that first sentence out, even louder than the rest of the interview, it opens up your vocal cords, relaxes you a bit, makes you know it's going to be okay, and it really sets your confidence nice and high for the rest of the interview. Fourth tip is look the part. Whatever makes you look and feel your best, make sure you do it well before the interview. Go there dressed your best, presenting your best self forward, and you will naturally do better. There's nothing worse than being late, not feeling like you're at your best, and then you're not going to perform the way you want to perform. My fifth tip is understand how to answer competency-based questions. It is very likely you're going to be asked a competency-based question, which are ones like these, ones that test a time you used a competency of a barrister. The absolute best way to answer these questions is by doing something you law students will know as the Islands of Awesomeness. This involves putting a circle in the centre of a page and then putting a various competency of a barrister, attention to detail, resilience, advocacy skills, that kind of thing. And then you mind map off of it all the occasions where you have shown that competency through your work or life experience. When you're doing that, it's really important to be as specific as possible so that in the interviews, when you're asked about a specific occasion, you can star it and tell them exactly about the situation, what you did, the outcome, and what you learned from it, because that is the way to do this. My sixth tip is be ready for ethics-based questions. I recall one particular interview where this really trips me up. I wasn't prepared for the level of ethics questions I was going to receive. I was more expecting sort of the professional ethics on the bar type of questions. Some of the questions that threw me a little bit are on screen now, but it's certainly quite a far cry from your multiple choice tick box you do on the BSB. Firstly, my advice would be to read some of the Bar Council's ethic and practice guidance on their website. It sets out very clear guidance for what barristers should do in certain ethical dilemmas. The use of ChatGPT and other large language models is a very hot topic, so make sure you brush up on this specific guidance, which I also pop down below. As with the ethics exam, make sure you know your core duties inside and out, and more importantly, how they interact with each other. When you're answering the question, make sure you work out loud like you're doing maths in your head, but speak out loud what core duties you're thinking about, what's engaged, the considerations, and what you're going to do. My seventh and final tip is that you need to do your research. There's nothing worse than going into a pupillage interview thinking a Chambers does an area of law that they've advertised on their website, but you turn up and that's actually not the main focus of Chambers whatsoever, and they only have one barrister who specialises in that area. To avoid this and just to prepare more generally, I would look at the 3 most junior tenants on their profile and the 3 most senior tenants on the website. Then you'll get a good sense of the kind of work the Chambers covers and the breadth of what they're actually doing. Have a look at the kind of cases that they have done, read some of them, but don't fall into the trap of referencing it in an interview unless you know enough about it to give a comprehensive answer. There's nothing worse in an interview than if you reference a case that you don't understand and one of the barristers who was actually involved in the case is on the panel and begins to question you about it. My final thoughts are that pupillage interview season is extremely tough, especially if you have multiple interviews while you're doing the bar course or working. So it's really important to continue doing things that keep you sane, whether that's the gym, a sport, reading, whatever. Try and get some sense of balance and make sure you prepare for your interviews in the way that I've outlined in this video. The very best of luck to everyone who's doing pupillage interviews this year.